just brief. So the recording is now in progress, as you probably all heard. Let's continue if you're consenting to that. So in terms of the aims for the day, we're going to start with hearing about the latest developments in the Agricultural Transition Plan and how the farming in protected landscape fits in with that. Secondly, to understand the farming in protected landscapes mechanism, an example of how it's being implemented in different landscapes, and explore ideas for funding with other farmers across the north of England. And in how we're going to do this, Helen, if you just want to pop the agenda up, which I think everybody's seen anyway, but we'll just have a run us through the outline of the agenda. We're going to have three sets of presentations initially over the next half an hour or so, and then we'll have a session for questions and discussions, which, as I said, we'll try to manage that through the chat, although we may well identify some individuals to ask their own questions if we have time to do that. There'll then be a second set of three presenters looking at opportunities for change using farming in protected landscapes, more from the farming industry, who are going to give us some interesting presentations in that regard. And then we'll have another plenary discussion and questions 10-minute session after that point. And then we'll move into facilitated groups. I think we've, as I'm told, got around about 100 people contributing to the session today. We'll move into 10 groups of 10. They'll all be facilitated. We'll have a 20-minute opportunity to discuss in those facilitated groups, and then a brief opportunity for really key points of coming out of those facilitated groups to be shared with others, final reflections, and then the close of the meeting. So that's the outline of where we're going to head to today. So unless there's any initial questions, as time's moved on a little bit with getting everybody in, I'll probably head over to the first speaker, if that's okay with everybody. So just by way of brief introduction, we're very fortunate to have James Woodward from Sustain with us this morning. James tells me he's previously worked for Natural England, the NFU and Defra in terms of policy work. And he also spent some time on his family farm up in Cumbria, so good link to a farming operation in the north of England anyway. So James is going to talk to us about the wider opportunities within the Agricultural Transition Plan. So James, if you're happy with that as an introduction, and we move on to you now, and if you want to share your screen and the presentation, thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much, Adrian. Yeah, let me just get my screen up and I'll start sharing that. Hopefully you can all see that all right. So thank you very much, Adrian. Yeah, it's lovely to be here to get to talk to you all about kind of developments with the agricultural policy and schemes coming through Defra and kind of where we are at the moment. Just very quickly, a bit of background to who Sustain are. So we're a small charity. We're made up of over 100 different organisations. I've added some of the farming ones on there to give you a bit of an idea as to what we do and who we work with. And yeah, we do all sorts of stuff, all the way from kind of like food poverty and building community wealth around food and stuff, all the way through to like sustainable farming and agricultural policy, supply chains and climate and nature stuff. And we do a really broad range of stuff, as well as you can see on the bottom of the slide, and who we work with. So today I'm here to give kind of an overview of where we are in terms of environmental and management schemes in the Agricultural Transition Plan. That's a bit of an overview as to what's coming through from Defra over the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years or so. So I'm sure you're all aware of the different ELM schemes, the Sustainable Farming Incentive, the Local Nature Recovery Scheme, and the Landscape Recovery Scheme. And then under the Agricultural Transition Plan more broadly, which on here says until 2024, but really it's up until 2027, is a lot of the other stuff around like productivity grants and the farming and protected landscapes, which is the main topic of today. And then a few other bits and pieces around new entrants and countryside stewardship will still be there for a little while, and some stuff coming through on like research and development grants for on-farm stuff as well, and whatnot. And then finally, and I'm not going to touch on this, but there is going to be a whole kind of new regulation framework coming through to replace what we've currently got under the European Union regs, but I'm sure some of those will stay longer term. So just quickly, the Sustainable Farming Incentive. So essentially, the idea of this scheme is that it's going to pay you or pay farmers and growers to use more sustainable land management practices and methods. it's basically going to be based on what Defra are calling standards. So, in normal speak, kind of like packages of options that are based on either farm types or various landscape like hedges and that sort of stuff. And each standard's going to have different levels within it. So an entry, an intermediate, and an advanced level within it that farmers can apply into. And essentially, it's going to be all about kind of stuff like improving soil quality and protecting water and air quality, supporting farmers to lower their inputs, doing kind of more sensitive management of hedges and trees. And there's going to be a standard on moorlands and rough grazing as well, which I'll touch on a little bit more in a sec. There's also going to be the local nature recovery scheme, the kind of second part of ELM. Still very much in the kind of the design and development phase, so there's not a huge amount of detail on it yet, but that's all kind of based around paying farmers to create, manage on-farm habitats and link them across not just your own farm, but working with your neighbours to connect those habitats up across the farm landscape that you're in. And then finally, there's this landscape recovery scheme. So that's paying landowners to focus more on nature recovery. I mean, some people call it rewilding, but some of those projects might not quite go as far as that. But yeah, these are bigger scale projects. And I think Defra are going to fund an initial 10, see how those go. And between 500 and 5,000 hectares in scale, so quite large. Very much kind of like, I suppose, trying to deliver Defra stuff around the net zero and the biodiversity targets that they have. So in the short term, things to kind of think about and look out for. So the Sfi Pilots, so testing out the scheme as it stands at the moment, that starts this autumn. I think about 2,000 different farms across the UK, across England, are going to be involved in that. So I'm sure some of you are, I hope some of you are at least. And that's going to be really testing things like the actions that are within those standards and things like the land management plan that farmers are going to have to create as part of doing an SFI agreement. Some probably testing out some of the payment rates and timings when you get paid, that sort of thing, and stuff like guidance as well. Next year, they're going to introduce a simplified version of the SFI scheme. It's going to be based on 4 things. So there'll be an arable and a horticultural soil standard that you can apply for. And there'll be an improved grassland soil standard that you can apply for. So very much getting farmers to start taking actions on their land to improve the kind of quality of their soil and reduce diffuse pollution from their land, that sort of thing. There'll be what they're calling a moorland and rough grazing standard. So that is basically going to be doing like a review, as I'm aware of it, is going to be doing like a review of your management practices on your land or on land that you have grazing rights for, and working out areas for potential improvement. And then the other one is going to be an animal health and welfare kind of review as well. So that's going to be about working with your vet to look at what you're doing on your farm already and where there might be some areas for improvement or new things that you can do. So that'll be next year. And that scheme is for any farmer to apply into that fits under those 4 different things. There'll also be some pilots starting next year on the local nature recovery scheme, as I understand it. So it'll be interesting to see what comes through that. And then, these landscape recovery projects are going to be identified over the next couple of years, and then they'll start funding those. In terms of payments, I've got some more information on the next slide, but we've basically been promised that they'll be better than countryside stewardship, but they won't necessarily fully replace what you get under BPS, and especially if you have BPS and countryside stewardship on your farm at the moment. Talk of this 30% uplift, but I think we have to recognise it's not going to completely replace those payments. And just very quickly as well, the 2.4 billion annual budget for farming in England. So again, Defra made some announcements that that's going to be split equally between those 3 ELM schemes that I've mentioned. But I think there might have to be a bit of a revision on that because they haven't worked out how things like the farming protected landscape budget fits into that, and the productivity grants and that sort of thing. So there might be some changes to that, but it's going to be a rough equal split. So so I'm not going to dwell on this too much because I don't have time to, but these are the 8 standards that have been proposed so far under the SFI, and this is all public information, so you can go online and see this yourselves, but that gives you rough ideas to the kind of payment rates you might see. And those 3 different payment rates that you've got on most of those standards, that's based on the the entry, intermediate, and advanced levels. So where you'll be asked to do better, more different types of actions, so higher payments. Quick look at that. I'm not going to dwell on it too much. So in the long term, what we're hoping is that farmers are going to be able to stack these schemes on top of each other. So be able to have both a sustainable farming incentive agreement and the local nature recovery agreement and a FIPL, a farming and protected landscape kind of agreement on top of each other so that you can kind of get greater payments for delivering the public goods that you're delivering on your land. And government is saying they are looking at this, which is good, and they're looking at trying to make this as simple as possible, so maybe like a single agreement process type of thing. But yeah, slightly longer term, so looking from 2024 onwards, all three of those ELM schemes that I've mentioned, that's when they'll get rolled out in their entirety. In terms of the sustainable farming incentive standards, I think we're hoping and expecting them to be more ambitious by 2024 as they test them out, and that there'll be a greater number of standards. So there might be some stuff on like agroforestry, or we're hoping there'll be like an organic one, or there'll be like a separate horticultural and orchards type standard and that sort of thing. And by 2024, we should know much more certainty on what the payment rates will be. So I know that means there's going to be some uncertainty over the next few years, but really it's about taking those opportunities where you can. And I think, you know, it's important to start looking at doing a detailed business plan or revising what you have at the moment to see how the next couple of years is going to fit in for you. In terms of the agricultural transition plan, just some of the stuff I wanted to touch on. So I haven't put the farming and protected landscapes into this slide because that's the main thing today, and you'll hear a lot more about it from people who know a lot more than me. But on the new entrant stuff, this is very much going to be sort of supporting people who want to come into the sector on things like business planning advice or advice on how to get access to land. And I'm hoping there'll be some kind of like mentorship type stuff in there, helping new entrants link up with farmers who are farming at the moment. The productivity grants very much is probably going to be like a replacement of the countryside productivity small grant scheme that some of you might have entered into in the past. So things around like tech and equipment to do with precision farming, or we're hoping there's going to be some like small scale farming innovation in there as well, stuff around livestock handling and that kind of thing. There's going to be this lump sum scheme, which you might have heard of recently, was announced. So apparently this is all about helping farmers retire out of the sector who want to, and helping them do that, giving them like a lump sum payment almost, and kind of opening up some new land, hopefully for new entrants. I think we're kind of a bit worried it's more going to be about, you know, it's only going to really help big farmers expand, but which is good in some ways, but we'd like to see that also channeled into helping new entrants get into the sector as well. And then I'm sure you all know about the BPS stuff that's coming around, reductions in payments and the phasing out of that to 2027. So I won't dwell on that too much more. This is quite a busy table, but it basically, I've taken this from Defra's agricultural transition plan, and it's a bit of a timeline, it's a bit of a chart which kind of shows you when schemes are coming in, when they might end, how it all overlaps with each other, when different parts of the schemes change. So as you can kind of see from this, it's quite a complex picture, admittedly, and I know it's going to be quite hard to get heads around it, but yeah, this is kind of where stuff will come in and out. So take a quick second to scan over it. What I'll do is I'll share these, hopefully I'll try and share these slides afterwards, so you have this to look at afterwards, because I know that's quite a complex slide there. But yes, so I think I've managed to keep within my 10 minutes, Ellen, but yeah, sorry, I know it's a very brief overview of stuff. It's quite hard to fit it all into 10 minutes in going into the detail of it all. I know it's probably, in a way, for a lot of people, it's quite overwhelming. Lots of new schemes, new names and terms being used, and there's lots of different routes that farmers can take to find their way to essentially when ELM is rolled out in 2024. So, you know, but there are some good opportunities there as well to grasp and get. I think the farming and protected landscapes is a great opportunity for farmers to get used to working in a way that works under ELMs. So yeah, I would just say, don't be afraid to ask questions. There's no question that's silly. You know, talk with your neighbours and your advisors to try and get a grasp of all of this. And I know it's probably a bit of an obvious one, but I think it's really important over the next year or so to really revise business plans or create one if you don't have one, because those will really help you understand how this all fits in with your business and how you can carry on being a farmer. Yeah, thank you very much for listening. That's my contact details if you want to get in touch with me. And if you do have any questions you'd like to have answered, do pop me an email and I'll try and answer those. Yeah, thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, James, for that very informative presentation. As you said, lots of stuff in there, and there's probably to add, and we could probably put some stuff in the chat, Ellen, lots of stuff on various websites, including obviously .gov, with the recent announcements from Defra at the end of June. Lots of good stuff on there about the future, and it's great also to get people now coming out of the background to introduce themselves. It's always good to know who we've got on the call, so thanks, Neil, for prompting that in the chat. I'm sure that will bring forward a lot of questions, but we better move on with presentations for now. We're pretty well to time. I'd just like to introduce our next speaker, who's Kate Caulfield, Senior Policy Officer with the Landscape Access and People team of Defra, who's going to give a presentation about Farming in Protected Landscapes programme. So over to you, Kate, and ably assisted no doubt by Alan, who I've just spotted on the screen, and I think Keith's lurking in the background somewhere as well. So over to you, Kate. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm joined by Alan, who's also part of the Farming in Protected Landscapes team at Defra, and Keith as well. We've got some slides, which I think Keith is going to pop up, if that's okay. Perfect. Thank you, Keith. Cool. So Farming in Protected Landscapes programme, which is what we're here to talk about. Keith, Alan and I are part of the Farming in Protected Landscapes team at Defra, and we sit in the wider Landscapes Access and People team at Defra. So we sort of look after all the protected landscapes policy and look at sort of access and engagement to the countryside. So our presentation today will hopefully provide you with a bit more information on the recently launched Farming in Protected Landscapes programme. Next slide, please, Keith. So, wild protected landscapes, obviously this programme is really focused on the protected landscapes. So our national parks and areas of outstanding natural beauty, AONBs, we see them as special and unique at Defra and recognise that they make up some of our most beautiful and iconic landscapes. In England, there are 10 national parks and 34 AONBs that cover nearly 25% of the land in England. These are the landscapes eligible for the programme. We recognise that protected landscapes range from lowland landscapes such as the Cotswolds and the Norfolk coast to uplands such as North Pennines and the Lake District. With having such a wide geographical range, they contain a really wide variety of species, important for nature and nature recovery. We also recognise that protected landscapes do much to support their local communities there, helping to support jobs and investments in the areas. Combined national parks and AONBs attract over 260 million visitors a year. We also recognise the important role that these landscapes play in health and well-being for the population of England, and that there are challenges that come with that, particularly as we've seen in the past year. Therefore, we recognise that we need to support, back one slide please, Keith. We recognise therefore that we need to support the farmers and land managers and people who are living and working in these areas to protect these places, the species within them, and also to help manage the visitors that come to these places. So that's sort of how we came to having the Farming in Protected Landscapes programme. Next slide, please. So the Farming in Protected Landscapes programme will run from July 2021. We launched a couple of weeks ago, opening for applications. So applications are open at the moment, and it will run until March 2024. For farmers and land managers within a protected landscape. The programme is a programme of projects. It's not a scheme, see it as a programme of projects. The projects that will be funded will support sort of 4 key areas: supporting nature recovery, mitigating the impacts of climate change, providing opportunities for people to discover, enjoy and understand the protected landscape and its cultural heritage. The programme will also look to support nature-friendly, sustainable farm businesses in ways which also help to deliver those other points that I mentioned for the programme, such as nature recovery. So in terms of this programme, we've developed it, Defra's developed it really closely with support of National Park and AONB staff from across England. So we've worked really closely with people such as Adrian on this call to develop the programme. Next slide, please, Keith. So there are as I say, it's a programme of projects. The programme will pay for projects that provide value for money and deliver for at least one of these 4 key themes of the programme. So the 4 key themes are climate, nature, people and place. And all projects will need to meet one of these themes, hopefully a couple of these themes. There's a full list of outcomes that the programme is looking to deliver on gov.uk. And every project will need to deliver at least one of these outcomes, and that will need to be shown in applications. Just to give you a sense of what those outcomes might look like. So for the climate theme, it might be that more carbon is stored, sequestered, or both, or that actions reduce flood risk. For nature, it might be that a greater area of wildlife-rich habitat is concerned, or there's a greater connectivity between habitats. For people, it might be that there are more opportunities for people to explore, enjoy and understand the landscape, or more opportunities for specifically diverse audiences to enjoy the landscapes. And then looking at the place theme, it might be about enhancing or reinforcing the quality and character of the landscape, or conserving historical structures and features. A key part of this programme, as I've touched on, is about the fact that it's being delivered in our protected landscapes that are special for many reasons. Therefore, projects that are funded will also need to support the priority of the protected landscapes management plan. So all protected landscapes will have sort of management priorities or management plans, and projects will need to fit within your local protected landscapes plan. But your protected landscapes will happily, hopefully, talk to you more about quite what those plans are and how you can help to meet them. So the last thing I'm going to touch on before handing over to Alan is just giving you a sense of the sort of projects that we're expecting to see. We're expecting to see a wide range of projects. There's a lot of flexibility built into the programme so that farmers can really work with the protected landscape that they farm within to work out what's going to work best on their farm and for the protected landscapes. But we might see, like I've touched on earlier, promoting connectivity between habitats, replacing stiles with gates on public footpaths to promote easier access, conserving historical features on a farm such as lime kilns or lead mining heritage, supporting a locally branded food initiative that promotes the links between the product and the landscape in which it's produced, action to reduce carbon emission on a farm, or gathering data and evidence to help inform conservation farming practice. So there is a real variety, and that's because of those 4 key themes that I touched on: climate, nature, people, and place. So I'm going to hand over to Alan in our team, who's going to talk a little bit more now about the sort of process for applying to the programme and things like that.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. And just going to go through a little bit more on the application process for the programme. A lot of the information I'm covering is already available on the gov.uk page, which I'll share in the chat for yourselves to look through as you wish. And as mentioned previously, the slides will be shared after the session. So in terms of who can apply, the Farming and Protected Landscapes programme, it's open to farmers, land managers working within the boundaries of a national park, AONB, or the Broads. And it can be used to support activity on other land, as long as the project will benefit a protected landscape or its body's objectives or partnership initiatives. So to apply, you must either manage all the land included in the application, have control of the activities that you would like to do on the land, or you would have to have written consent from the parties who have management and control of that land. So other organizations and individuals can apply, but as long as they're collaborating with the farmer or land manager, or in support of a farmer or a group of farmers, perhaps working as a farm cluster. So common land is also eligible for the funding, so you can apply as a landowner with sole rights or as a group of commoners acting together. In terms of how to apply, the entire programme is being run through the protected landscape bodies, so the national parks, AONBs, the Broads. In order to request an application form, you would contact your protected landscape in the first instance. We're recommending that having a discussion with the landscape body is helpful in terms of being able to work through the ideas and to help develop the projects further. As Kate mentioned, the programme has opened on the 1st of July, and the first window for this year is running up to the 31st of January for the first year of the programme. So funding is awarded to the successful applicants through the application window. So you just submit your application when it is ready. The protected landscapes will consider it for future years of the programme, applications for future years of the programme as well. In terms of multi-year projects, obviously, I think it's a 3-year programme, so we are obviously encouraging longer projects as well, but all the project funding will end and activities would end by March 2024. In terms of how the applications will be assessed, so it'll be assessed by the protected landscape bodies. It'll be scored upon in these different weightings. So we're suggesting 40% for the project outcomes, climate, nature, people, and place, 20% for the value for money, 20% for how sustainable the project will be and the legacy it is likely to leave, 20% for how you're likely to carry out the project. The applications, we're saying, anything over £5,000 is going to be judged by a local assessment panel, which would be convened by each protected landscape organisation. So they typically would form representatives, including Natural England, the farming and land management community, local specialists, members of the protected landscape body themselves. We're expecting that these local assessment panels meet to make decisions every 6 to 8 weeks over the course of the window. So from 1st of July to the 31st of January next year. We're offering sort of smaller grants of the less than £5,000. You'd apply through the same application templates, but that assessment will be made by the local protected landscape organisation themselves, a senior member of the team, not related to the project, the advice given to the application. In terms of funding for the program, you could get up to 100% of the costs if you wouldn't gain commercially from it. Otherwise, the program would fund a proportion of the costs, which is dependent on how much the project would benefit financially from the activity that was being undertaken. And I appreciate, obviously, from James's presentation, there are a number of other schemes out there. The aim of the program, we want it to be a discrete program of individual projects, as Kate mentioned. We want it to be working alongside, not in competition with the existing and new schemes, and trying to add value in the landscapes where best needed. And again, your protected landscape team will be best placed to advise whether or not a scheme would be better suited for your work, or whether or not farming protected landscapes would give you the opportunity to deliver the project you were looking for. So you can still get work funding if you're already in an agri-environment scheme, as long as you're not paid twice for the same work. So then the idea being that we wouldn't be double funding for the activities from different pots. So if your project is in the same, if it's the same type of project you'd be looking for in a countryside stewardship activity, you'd be paid the same as the countryside stewardship rate. But if it is if it's outside of the realms of countryside stewardship, the protected landscapes will be able to offer the guidance on what the estimated costs would be for that program. I should probably say in this section as well, as just mentioned, but it isn't mentioned elsewhere, in terms of match funding, program applicants can source other sources of funding for the program. They would have to declare that in their application funding as well. But as part of that, if you have other potential sources of funding that would be available, you can include that within your application as well. But that's documented in the gov.uk page in full. Next slide, please. On the after your agreement ends, you wouldn't have to maintain any of the natural, cultural, or access activities as part of the program after your agreement period ends. But you have to maintain the capital infrastructure like fences and gates for up to 5 years from the completion date of the activity, and likewise for machinery assets. Next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. Yes, so in terms of next steps, I think if there's any other questions, obviously, we have time, obviously, within the session today to talk through anything specifically. Our first port of call we would suggest would be your protected landscapes bodies to request an application form, perhaps to discuss any project ideas that you had developed. For more information publicly about the Farming Protected Landscapes program, I've just posted the guidance to Farming Protected Landscapes, which covers what we discussed today. But again, we'll share these slides around with the links provided in there for more information. But I think other than that, thank you for listening. And if you have any other questions, yeah, please let us know. We'll try our best to answer.
Right, thank you very much, Alan and Kate, for that informative presentation. Lots of questions coming through now on the chat, I see. Some of them I think will be answered by the next presenters, so we will hold those back, obviously, for the session that we've got after the next two presenters. But it's great to get your questions through. Thank you very much on that. So moving swiftly on, as we're a little behind time scale, but to give the next two speakers plenty of time, we've now got a couple of colleagues of mine from the protected landscape bodies themselves, Sue Fletcher, my opposite number, head of landscape from the Peak District National Park Authority, and then Chris Woodley-Stewart, the director of the North Pennines AONB. So firstly, over to Sue, and Sue and Chris are going to talk about how actually the programme as introduced by Defra is being implemented within the protected landscape bodies themselves. So over to you, Sue, for you first, and then moving on to Chris. Thanks.
Thanks, Adrian, and hello, everyone. I'm just really appreciative of the opportunity to join you today. So cracking on with it then, in terms of a Peak District perspective for this, links to what Kate and Alan were saying, the landscapes review and the 44 protected landscapes, AONBs and national parks. What do we want to actually get? What are we concentrating on from a Peak District perspective? So we really want to support the farmers and land managers to get ready for 2024 and greater public good delivery. We want to make sure we make the most of this opportunity that Defra provided through the Farming and Protected Landscapes programme. And part of that is about showing how a more flexible local approach can deliver for local circumstances. So for each landscape, that it does need to be complementary to the other schemes, but it is able to do things that current schemes can't do. And again, it's an opportunity linking back to that protected landscapes review of us working better with other protected landscapes, and that's both at an organisational level and at a farmer land manager level as well. So what have we done so far? We've started by using the existing farm advisor capacity and contacts that they have. That's about starting to think and talking to farmers about the projects they might want to do and how the programme could be used to support those ideas. And that might be a sort of quite well developed project or just the sort of beginning of an idea. We've started the recruitment process. We're midway through that in terms of the additional capacity to support that delivery. We're really hoping that farmers will contact us and speak to those advisors. In terms of the priorities, we've done a bit of work around the 4 programme themes: nature, climate, people and place, and also how that works the Peak District National Park Management Plan. We're in the start of reviewing that, so we're looking at the priorities in the existing management plan and the emerging ones. So we're trying to do that in a sort of fairly straightforward fashion that we can share with farmers. And we've also developed some really quite bespoke Peak District examples of the sort of thing that we're hoping to see come forward. And I just love that picture of the cows looking over the wall. Sorry about that, right? In terms of the local assessment panel, we're following the Defra guidance that we've got. We want it very much to be farmer-led. Here in the Peak District, we're basing it on an existing Peak District Land Managers Forum. We've a very active and successful Brexit subgroup, which has myself as the lead protected landscape officer. It currently has got 6 farmers land managers on it. We're looking at using 3 plus deputies. We're not sure if the deputies is going to work in the local assessment panel, but that's what we're working on at the moment. We've got NFU and CLA representatives. We'll also have on the panel a Natural England rep, and because we've had to change some of our standing orders and processes to fit with this programme, we've got a lead authority member on the panel as well. And then at the same time, we've got another range of named specialists from different organisations who can bring that extra expertise in as required. So we're trying to keep the panel quite tight, 8 to 10 people tops. In terms of promotion, for the launch back at the end of June, we sorted out the website, tried to keep it quite simple. We've done a poster which will go out to vets, agricultural suppliers. We've done a bespoke newsletter, which is just perhaps a little bit more user-friendly, again with those bespoke Peak District examples. And we're setting up a number of webinars with existing groups through the NFU, farmer groups like the facilitation groups, producer groups and other stakeholders to get that message out. We've also reopened our drop-in centre at the local livestock market, but to be honest, even with the changes with COVID, I think it's still drop and go, so we might have to keep that under review as to whether that's worthwhile for farmers as well. And then just to end with very quickly, inquiries so far, they're really coming through. There's over 40, massive range from quite small to quite substantial, from classic hay meadow restoration and management, including essential wall restoration, something that won't fit within countryside stewardship at the moment, to lime kiln restoration discussion routes and some infrastructure that needs to go in, which links to a really busy public national trail. And another one was recently was the post-COVID lockdown, a pop-up campsite with, again, a concession link to some really high quality grassland. And the other thing that's coming through is, which links to some of the questions actually, is need for fairly straightforward, clear, simple facts and figures around carbon, including an emerging group who want to do some work about carbon management plans as well. So that's a really rapid sort of quick summary to try and give you a feel for what we've done so far and how it's going. So now I'm going to hand over to Chris Woodley-Stewart, who will share with you what's similar, what's different in terms of where the North Pennines is. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Chris.
Over to Chris.
Thanks very much, Sue. No slides from me this morning. I'm going to fill in some of the space around what Kate and Alan and Sue have been saying. So yeah, I'm Chris Woodley, Director of the North Pennines AONB Partnership. I wish I was joining you from this nice Teesdale hay meadow behind me, but sadly I'm in my front bedroom. I know there are some other AONB colleagues on this session, and so I'll try and, as I say, fill in some of the space around what people have said before and give a bit of North Pennines specific flavour. So in the AONB network, if there's one thing that we'd have asked for apart from securer and fairer core funding, then resources to engage with the farming community to help support high nature value farming would have been it. So we think FIPL's an outstanding opportunity, though it does come with some challenges for overstretched teams. In the North Pennines, we're really focused on putting farming at the heart of nature recovery and nature recovery at the heart of farming. So this is, as I say, there are some real challenges for AONB partnerships, in particular short term, until we can get the people in place to work on the programme. Just to put things in perspective, because I like a good comparative stat, all 34 AONBs in England combined received the same government funding as the budget of one medium-sized secondary school, about half the budget of the South Downs National. That said, I know there are no National Park Authority farm advice teams sitting around waiting for stuff to do. So until we can all get the staff in place to get out and support applicants to engage with the programme, you might have to bear with us a little to begin with. We're expecting a reasonably high volume of applicants, given the late and challenging start to this. I think we're still hoping some of the funds can be reprofiled into the second and third years. In the larger AONB teams, we're utilising what resources we can in the short term by asking those who have farming and land management focused roles to get up to speed with the programme really quickly and focus their attention on it. We've published a short brochure on the programme, and we've sent that out in the post because we're very conscious that not every farm in our AONB has really good so rather than emailing this to everybody, and not everybody gets their email every 5 minutes, we've produced a brochure on this, and I'll put that in the chat during the course of this event. We're working with the NFU and other farmer organisations to spread the word about the programme. We ran a webinar for advisors and agents and one for farmers and land managers as potential applicants, and I'll post a recording of that into the chat in case anybody has a spare hour. This webinar has been really well received. We've had about 30 initial inquiries, and that's growing every day. And these range from simple things like the restoration of boundaries and hay meadows to some complex in-stream restoration, installation of a bridge, the consolidation of historic features, and some multifaceted projects. We really want people to innovate, and we want to support them to do that. And one of our tasks is to help people make the most of this, but also to utilise the other sources of support which work best for them. So particularly in relation to woodland creation, for instance, someone comes to us and wants to do a bit of scrub planting, some infield trees, that kind of thing, we can support that really well. If someone comes to us and wants to plant 30 hectares of woodland, I think we're duty bound to point them towards something like the England Woodland Creation Offer, which gives people longer term payments at a higher rate. So, and for some proposals, we'll be pointing people towards some of the upcoming initiatives that James identified around farm business innovation. We've got some other programs in the North Pennines, notably our Tea Swale program that also covers Yorkshire Dales with Adrian's team, and dovetail with FIPL and add value to it. But we are still working out how best to do this. Some of the issues we faced in those programs, and that we've also faced early on in FIPL, mainly how to encourage farmers and land managers to take action for nature recovery and public engagement now, when the future is so uncertain. One of the things we're stressing here is the recently published Defra Principles for Environmental Payments, which maybe Alan or Kate could post into the chat. If people haven't seen it, it's really worth seeing, which includes the crucial principle that people acting now for nature recovery, getting land in good fettle for nature and public goods now, won't be disadvantaged in upcoming schemes. We think this principle will really help us to use FIPL to help people prepare, especially those less used to schemes, help them transition to the new arrangements. I noticed a question from Mick in the chat about local assessment panels. In the North Pennines, we've partly drawn from our existing partnership, our vice chair, our NFU rep, the Tourism Access and Historic Environment Working Groups, and one of our community seats. But for the rest of the seats, which is about half the panel, rather than simply selecting ourselves people from the farming and land management sector, we took the decision to seek expressions of interest from that community, and we promoted that through our brochure and webinars and the press. That's generated 19 self-nominations, and we're just going through, with our vice chair, one of my team of the NFU rep, the selection process for those. I really didn't expect 19 people to come forward, but we want to focus on a blend of experience, a rough geographical spread across our big AONB, and a rough gender balance if we can pull that off. FIPL's a fantastic opportunity to support some great projects for nature, climate, people and place. Look forward to delivering it despite all the challenges. If you're on this call and you farm or manage land in one of the northern AONBs, you'll find staff there ready and willing to help you make the most of the programme. This is a game changer for AONBs in particular. I hope it can be for our farming and land management to support the other things that are out there at the minute. It's been a pretty intense process to get us this far. There's been some really good collaborative work to make that happen. We're going to keep our core working group going to continue support local teams throughout the programme's life. And we want to learn and adapt as we go along, and feedback from farmers and land managers will be absolutely critical to that process of learning and adaptation and how this is working. I think Sue and I are able to stay and answer some questions at this point with Adrian and Kate, and we will be happy to go away and find the answers if we don't know, because even though we've been engaged in helping to develop the programme, we are in a sense still trying to fit parts onto this car as we're asking you to drive it away, if that makes sense. So if we don't know the answers today, we'll absolutely go away and I hope that gives a bit of perspective from the AONBs. Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Chris and Sue. For that, we'll now open up to the questions. There's a lot of questions in the chat, and some of them are being answered, and hopefully some of them have been answered by the very two helpful presentations we just had, and Chris has formally answered some of those questions, but there are one or two perhaps that haven't been. A question from Mick, possibly for Defra, specifically about what's being done to simplify the information and reduce the bureaucracy. I felt some of this came out, and the intention is to get the money available for people who need it and to where it is intended. So I don't know whether Kate and Alan want to say a bit more in terms of that specific question, but I do feel it's partly addressed.
Yeah, I'm happy to say a bit more. I mean, in terms of the money, once the funding gets to the protected landscape authorities, so to the Yorkshire Dales, for example, and it's in their hands, there's quite a lot of they have quite a lot of independence in how they spend the money and what projects they choose to take forward. So we've shared like a common framework called the national framework, which is sort of the broad parameters of which we hope that protected landscapes will deliver within. But there is a lot of local decision making at the heart of it, because we recognise that protected landscapes know best the challenges that they're facing and what needs to be addressed. In terms of the sort of complex landscape, I think you're referring to, of how many fundings programs there are out there. I think everyone across Defra recognises that it's complicated. There's a lot out there. They're all at different times and various things like that. And we don't sit in the Future Farming and Countryside Programme team. We sit in the Landscapes team. So we're sort of connecting in with them. But I think there's a lot of work going on their side of things to try and find a way to simplify it and get that message out. I think they're very much recognise that it's complex, and we feed in to those discussions to sort of say exactly what our programme's doing. But yeah, hopefully just more communications will come from their side of things to help keep things clear.
Great, thank you very much, Kate, for that. And that's an overriding principle of the scheme, that we are trying to make it less bureaucratic and to get the money to where it is intended to help with this transition. Just looking at some of the questions quickly that haven't been answered. Specific question about, do the commoners need a commoners association to enable an application? Would the money be given to the commoners association? Well, the rules of the scheme have been devised in parallel with what's required under countryside stewardship. So I guess that's the answer to that question, unless it was directed to Alan, but I suspect there's nothing more to say on that one, Alan. For now, you've given the flexibility for the commoners. That's in that one. There was another question from Mick about he felt that some of the protected landscapes teams have been struggling to give some of the advice. I think hopefully Chris and Sue have addressed that in part, and very much we're in the process of recruiting additional staff, and there's a variability within the teams. I don't know whether, Chris, you wanted to come in and say a little bit more, but I felt you'd answered the majority of this in your talk.
No, I think Mick's got a point. We are, as I say, we are recruiting at the moment. We have offered jobs to people. We're now waiting for their notice period to play out. But we are trying our best to accommodate everybody that applies, get back to them straight away, and try and get people out on site engaging with them to help them take advantage of the programme.
Great. Yeah, and that's very much a common response from from all the protected landscapes. We are working very hard on this. A question from Lisa Norton about the maintenance requirements. Might be, I don't know whether Alan, you wanted to say a bit more, in particularly about the fact that we're only looking at short-term maintenance over the programme. I mean, obviously there are reasons for that behind the scenes. It may be worth expanding if you're happy to do that, Alan.
I think the principles with the maintenance agreements was to make sure that the people's hands weren't being tied in terms of applying for other schemes or continuing funding work, and perhaps Sue and Chris can comment on this as well. It was more to make sure it was flexible enough that there are going to be capital and maintenance requirements as part of the agreements, part of the grant agreements, but it should also open up opportunities to continue work and so environmental beneficial work later on, and not be tied into the program. I don't know, Chris or Sue, if you want to say more about that either.
I'm quite happy. I mean, yes, in essence, we did a piece of work around that with the core working group and suggesting, because what we wanted to make sure that if farmers did something around nature recovery or around access, or even the cultural heritage aspect, what we didn't want to do was to put a maintenance clause on beyond the end of March 2024, so that hopefully the Environmental Land Management Scheme will be able to support the continued maintenance of those things that may be developed through or assisted to get in a better position during the Farming and Protected Landscapes programme. But the other things like straightforward capital works, there is a maintenance clause, and the machinery one is also tied to maintaining it for 5 years, and if you do sell it before that time, then there'll be a sort of relative clawback clause on that as well. So again, it doesn't mean to say you can't if you've tried something. One of the things I think that's been really good working with Defra is we're trying to make sure that this is still quite innovative. So you can try something, and if it doesn't work, we've hopefully covered that in terms of, it can develop beyond. So hopefully we'll come up with some really innovative projects. Thanks, Alan and Adrian.
Thank you, Sue and Alan, for that. That's confirmed very much the reasoning behind that, Lisa. I hope you're happy with the answer and the reasoning behind that. I think there's a good reason for that. There was a linked question from Sarah. Do enhanced habitats count as infrastructure? I think hopefully the answers that have just been given have answered that quite clear that they're not. It's capital works, the infrastructure. Just come a question in the chat I see from Bill Grayson. Is the funding for farming welcome, Bill? And good to hear from you. Is funding for farming and protected landscapes part of the government's 30 by 30 Strategy, very much so. That's part of the reasoning behind as to why that's been brought. This is one of the strategies behind it, Bill. So that's very much one of the reasons. The questions seem to be coming to an end. As Chris said, very much, we will continue answering these in the chat, and we will get answers to people if we're not able to do that during the session today. But as we're moving a little bit short of time, we probably better move on if everybody's happy with that, unless anybody from the panel in the first session wants to say any more. Just give you that last opportunity.
I'll have a go at that question about the LNRS in the chat, Adrian.
All right, thank you, Chris.
There's a question that's just come on evaluation that Alan might be able to quickly answer. Neil, that might be helpful because we haven't touched on that.
Yes, so the idea is it would be these evaluations are quite light touch. We're currently looking for an external evaluator to come in to assess the program as a whole. So I think there probably will be more guidance that will come out on this point. I'm not sure if I can say much more at this point. But we'll certainly be providing support to the protected landscapes who can then support and explain to farmers and land managers what type of activity would be entailed. We want it to be soft touch because we recognize that farmers and land managers, in terms of the work that you're doing, having time and expertise devoted to evaluating these would be challenging. So I think, yeah, so certainly we'll keep an eye on the evaluation and have more information as it develops.
Thank you, Alan, and thanks, Neil, for the question. Chris, did you want to say something about LNRSs before we move into the next suite of presentations?
I was going to it in the chat, but it'll save me some feverish typing. A couple of the pilots, 5 pilots for the local nature recovery strategy are in the north, and all of the protected landscape teams have been really engaged with those emerging strategies. Those strategies have themselves lent quite heavily on the AONB and National Park Management plans in their production. So at the moment, in the absence of fully formed local nature recovery strategies for the whole of the area, given that we have already been engaged in the programme, given that they reflect AONB management plans, we haven't sought to bring those LNRS coordinators into the process of prioritising FIPL. We don't really want to tie the hands of farmers and land managers in what they come forward with beyond. They have to meet the outcomes of the programme and they have to deliver on the AONB and National Park Management plans, which are pretty broad. And I think if you're delivering the AONB management plan or the National Park Management plan and you're not delivering on part of the LNRS at the same time, it's dramatically wrong somewhere, and I don't think it has.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. And just see that there's a final question, hopefully come up in the chat. What about Stonewalls? Yes, Stonewall Restoration is obviously in there, and obviously there's some local flexibility on that depending on management plans and priorities, but inevitably in the Northern Uplands protected landscapes, Stonewalls will be in there. So we'd better move on. I'd just like to give thanks in turn to Chris, Sue, Kate, Alan and James for their presentations in that first session, and for all of you who've contributed some really great questions. But it's running a little bit late, we better move on to the next session if everybody's happy with that. But continue to post the questions and comments and any more introductions. That's all really helpful and great stuff for the event. We're moving on now to a session where we're inviting 3 speakers to talk about opportunities for change using the Farming and Protected Landscape Scheme. The first of those speakers is Adam Briggs, who's the Environment Advisor for the NFU in the Northwest. So Adam, do you want to take us into your session? Thanks for joining us, and over to you.
Yes, thank you, Adrian. Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me to speak this morning. As Adrian said, I'm the Environment Advisor for the NFU in the Northwest of England, and I lead on agricultural transition for the NFU. And my role really is to just basically set the scene a little bit and to give my reflections on the scheme and maybe set up Andrea and Will for what they're going to say after they've heard me speak. So basically, in terms of my initial thoughts on the scheme, I think the first thing to say is it's positive that the need to support farmers in protected landscapes has been recognised. Farming in these landscapes have presented its own challenges and opportunities. In terms of challenges, the obvious one is the economics of farming in these sorts of areas, that farms themselves are very, very susceptible to changes in levels of support. But there are also further challenges around things like extra regulations you will face, and particularly challenges around planning. But the opportunities really lie around things such, tourism, diversification, particularly the climate agenda, and dovetailing food production with, the protected landscape too. So I think this scheme is an ideal opportunity to start addressing some of these challenges and unlocking some of the opportunities around in the protected landscapes. In terms of the scheme itself, when I looked at the scheme, I think the first thing that struck me was just how broad it is. You look at the 4 key themes, you've got nature, climate, people, and place. And when I'm speaking to farmers about this, the majority of things they are suggesting that potentially they could do, which I'll explain a few more in a little bit of detail later on. You could potentially fit them into any of those themes. So I think it's really positive, the fact that it's been left very, very broad. So it gives farmers the opportunities to come forward with any sort of suggestions they have. The other thing which kind of reflects something Sue said is this whole idea of localism and tailoring the deal to what fits into local prescriptions. I've lost count the number of farmers who've said that top-down schemes don't tend to reflect what I can do on my farm, and that managing by date doesn't actually fit the bill for me. So I think there's an opportunity really here for using this scheme to design approaches which actually fit the bill in their local areas, which will deliver for nature right across the board, and focus on outcomes rather than actually action. I think is a positive thing. And probably the third one to link to that as well is this idea of flexibility, is not being actually constrained by bureaucracy and process, and more focusing very much on what needs to be done, not on how it's actually done. And in terms of the things coming through and kind of reflect that, I'm getting phone calls from the ones that stick in the mind are some farmers looking maybe potentially organise specific visits for the Asian community from Blackburn. Been trying to do that for a number of years. Potentially this could fit the bill and actually unlock the potential for him. There's a specific example from an AONB where a farmer has a triple SI, which means it has to go in to HLS, but essentially it doesn't have sufficient land tenure on that triple SI to allow him to go into it. So essentially what that does is that knocks out all of his land from being able to go into an environmental scheme. So there's the opportunity here to actually look at this scheme and actually deliver an environmental scheme on the ground, which fits the bill for him, rather than actually saying, no, the scheme says you can't do it, therefore we can't. This land essentially doesn't get managed for nature, which is essentially what people want to achieve. So really, there's an opportunity here to fill in the gaps as well. I think there's a real opportunity around the whole climate change agenda as well. We could potentially use this scheme to move the debate away from where it gets stuck. At this moment in time, every time you talk about climate change, it always descends into an argument around plant versus meat, and then the debate gets stuck. I've done lots of presentations to farmers talking about the opportunities around climate change, but we always end up coming back and getting stuck very much in this, it's all about plant versus animals, and people start throwing statistics at each other. It's not helpful, and it doesn't address what needs to be done. So for me, there's an opportunity to use this scheme to try and address that, because I'm getting farmers coming to me, they're all starting to wake up with this carbon agenda, and the thing they want to know is, what is my carbon footprint on my farm? They want to know where they are now and where the opportunities are. So there's an opportunity to use this scheme for doing that. What I would say is that you need to be careful as to which calculation, which method you use. It's a glib comment, but I had a comment. It was actually from a farmer who grows lettuce down in West Lancashire, who does a lot of carbon footprints for her retailers, just depending on which one I use, I'm either worse than BP or better than Greta Thunberg. So you get this huge range of different answers depending on which one you actually use. So there's a real need to address that, to try and move the debate forward and unlock some of the opportunities around the climate agenda, which fit in with core farming practice. And just some final other things to consider. It's been talked about as well with respect to, making sure that this scheme dovetails with things like sustainable farming incentives in 2022, the Farming Investment Fund, the Farm Resilience Fund, which obviously there's a clear link to there. I think we need to look beyond that as well, because it's not just the money is not just going to be coming from the public sector, from government grants. There's going to be opportunities around things like biodiversity, net gain, and the private carbon finance. So we need to make sure that this scheme actually dovetails and doesn't block any opportunities that might come around those agendas too. And I think I would agree with probably what both Chris and Sue said. One of the biggest challenges in this, certainly initially, is going to be getting the money out the door onto farms between now and January 2022. There's a lot of money to spend, and we need to make sure we're all working together to get that money onto farm as quick as we possibly can. But to conclude, I'm very positive about how broad the scheme is, about how potentially different things can fit into there. Localism and flexibility is a good opportunity, and just need to make sure that the scheme fits the bills and works for farmers in the area, and not take too bureaucratic and prescriptive approach. And that's just a bit of hopefully I've got a little bit of time back there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Adam. Quite a few questions come up whilst you've been speaking, but again, we'll save the questions to the end of our three speakers now. So now introduce Andrea Meanwell, who's a colleague of mine, works for the Lake District National Park Authority, but also farms in the Yorkshire Dales National Park as well. So Andrea is going to give us her thoughts from, I guess, a bit of both sides. So over to you, Andrea.
Thanks, Adrian. Just trying to get this slides on. Okay, can you see that okay, Adrian?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Andrea, yeah.
Okay, so as Adrian said, I am the farming officer for the Lake District National Park, but today I'm speaking to you as a farmer. I'm an upland beef and sheep farmer. We have 2 lots of land. The owned land that we have is in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, and our rented land is in the Lake District National Park, just to confuse things. So we're farming in 2 different national parks, and this is about my farming in protected landscapes application and the things that I'm thinking of doing. So just a quick introduction to the farm. The owned land, 170 acres. It's a partnership between myself and my son. It's upland beef and sheep, as I said, and it's mainly rough fell sheep and Welsh Hill specklefaced sheep. We also breed the rare Wessant sheep that we sell to smallholders and owners of stately homes and things for conservation grazing. We have a pop-up campsite and a holiday cottage. I sell knitted products online. I have a diversification income by writing. I've written 5 books in the last 5 years about the farm, and I'm a columnist for the Guardian Country Diary and Cumbria magazine. And I'm the farming officer for the Lake District National Park, and I've taken that on as my son takes on more of the practical work on the farm. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the opportunity as I see it for my farm, and I've split it into the different areas that farming in protected landscapes is split into. And as Adam says, for me, really, it's all about what needs to be done. I'm not at this point thinking about change on a landscape scale or other farms. It's just really that I've had some things that have been quite frustrating and that I haven't been able to get them done through other schemes. But there's a whole series of things that I would like to do on the farm. So for nature, I have some areas of ancient woodland, which it's a bit of a long running saga, but when our farm was included in the extension area for the Yorkshire Dales National Park, we were kindly sent a botanist by the National Park to do a survey, and these areas were identified as being really important for woodland plants, but they're not fenced off and the sheep are just free ranging amongst them at the moment. So I then put in a countryside stewardship application and arranged for the woodland strips that are next to the river to be fenced off as riparian strips. It's almost like they're very old-fashioned fields with areas of woodland surrounding them. So that was fine, that went through, and I was then advised to do a woodland management plan so that I could get a higher tier woodland agreement for the areas that are not next to the river. So I did the woodland management plan, but then unfortunately, because I'd already got the riparian strip option on these parcels, I couldn't then fence this land off, even though it was agreed in my woodland management plan that it could be. So it's just generally a very frustrating situation where I've got stuck between these different schemes and I can't actually do the thing that I want to do. So what I'm hoping is that farming in protected landscapes will enable us to fence off these areas, which everybody agrees are very important areas of ancient woodland. And just to add connectivity to that, I'm going to put in some new hedges or improve old existing worn out hedges. For climate change, I'd really like to do a carbon audit, and we're trying to do rotational grazing here. Finding it a bit of a faff with the electric fencing, so I'd like to put some sort of permanent structure in that I can just clip the electric fencing onto. So that's another idea. And we're really trying to reduce our use of straw over the winter. So the idea is that we will put slats on the floor of one of the buildings so that we don't have to buy in straw, and that will reduce our carbon footprint. And hand in hand with the rotational grazing idea, I'd also like to have some portable hen houses that follow the livestock around to assist with building the soils there. So those are ideas that I'm thinking of for the climate section of farming in protected landscapes. For people, as I say, we already have a campsite and a holiday cottage. One of the problems that we've got here is, I don't know if you've travelled past on the M6, but we're essentially in like a large wind tunnel, and the wind just rushes along from south to north. And I've put portaloos on one of the fields now for 2 years to have this pop-up campsite. But the trouble is, sometimes during the night, the portaloos literally get blown over by the wind. And then you can imagine there's toilet mess everywhere. We have to go and push them up. And then it's a bit of a health and safety risk with people walking through all of that mess to get to the toilet. So my idea is to put a small wooden building up that these portaloos can actually fit in and won't get blown over. We've got very big issues here with water supply, particularly with climate change. So I don't want to put in a permanent flushing block of toilets because I literally haven't got enough water for my farmhouse, never mind for toilet. So that's an idea which will just hopefully make the campsite a little bit better for people. And another problem that we've had is last August, when it got very, very wet, the gates were all getting churned up. So we'd like to put some plastic tracking in the gateways. And we've got permission for a shepherd's hut as well, planning permission for that. So I'm thinking in year 3 of farming in protected landscapes, that's something that I may go ahead with. With a place theme, this very old barn here, I would like to use for my farm walks that I do on quite a regular basis. I have people coming out from Lancaster, sort of crafty groups who come and do a farm walk and then spend time having a craft along on the farm. But I haven't got anywhere really undercover for them to do that craft along, and it's very often very wet here. So I'd like to get the interior floor of that building restored. And I've also got a small cart shed that I'm interested in getting restored as well. So all of these are ideas that I'm thinking of. So I realise that all of these may not be funded by FIPL, but those are the things that I would actually like to get done. So what's happened so far is Helen Keep from the Yorkshire Dales has come out on a site visit, and she's now checking various issues about double funding, etc. Because as I said, particularly with the nature one, it's fiendishly complicated. So she's looking into that, and then together we're going to prioritise what it is that I want to do and get a 3-year plan in place for actually doing all of this stuff. Okay, thanks, Adrian.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andrea, for all that ideas in the presentation, generating some questions as we go. But before we go to the questions, I'd like to introduce Will Rawlings, who farms over in the west of the Lake District, who's going to present to us next on his thoughts about farming in protected landscapes and opportunities. Over to you, Will.
Hi, Grant. Hi, how are we doing, everybody? All right? How long have I got, Adrian? How much time?
You can have well, you were given 7 or 8 minutes, so that's, you know, right. we can overrun a little into the questions. Will, feel free.
Oh, that's fine, no problem. Yeah, I'm the senior member of a multi-generational farming business in the Ennerdale and Kinnyside areas of the Western Lake District, right on the very western edge of the Lake District National Park. I'm also chairman of the Herdwick Sheepbreeders Association. What I've been asked to talk about is something a little bit less mainstream, shall we say. Some might say it's a bit radical, but anyway. And it kind of came out of a frustration at the current systems. So a few of us in these Western Valleys decided that we might just rather than having these very bureaucratic top-down schemes whereby we are basically told what we have to do, and as long as we tick the boxes, we get paid for it, whether there's actually any real benefit in terms of nature recovery or climate change, it doesn't really matter as long as the box is ticked. We didn't think that was a particularly good way of moving forward, so we decided that we would have a goal to actually design some bottom-up stuff. So a number of us got together, and it was kind of decided that myself in the Ennerdale and Kinnyside area, and a guy called Julius Mandwell, who, as the name might suggest, is originally from an Italian descent, but is now very much part of the Wasdale farming community, that we would look at different ways of actually shaping the future of the western edge of the Lake District National Park. This was before there was any suggestion that farming in protected landscapes funding would be available, or indeed before anybody actually said that they would support us in doing so. As I say, it came out of frustration. We were sitting in a meeting at the local auction mart whereby the National Trust, Natural England, and some of the National Park officers were outlining their thoughts about what the future might look like in the Lake District. And the real tipping point was when someone from Natural England pronounced that their ambition was to get down to 0.02 livestock units per hectare stocking levels, which actually equates to 1 sheep for every 5 acres. If you consider that the Lake District National Park is pretty much unfenced, so relies heavily on a strong hefting system in order to allow us to continue farming in those areas, the reduction in sheep numbers to that level would mean that what is an already very fragile hefting system would actually collapse, and in some places it virtually has done already. We felt that this was unsustainable going forward because effectively it was rewilding by stealth without any real consideration of the people that were going to be affected mostly by it, i.e. the farmers that were living and working in the valleys. And we had to actually come up with some ways of working out how we could move forward. Again, frustrated, Natural England, we get a Natural England team come and assess our areas of in-by land and common. But again, I'll come back to that in a minute or two. They come and assess the common, and we agree normally that there will be a reduction in stocking density on the common. We then begrudgingly sign up to the scheme because we're now locked into a system that requires the extra capital that is introduced to the farms through the actual the scheme funding. So through the country, it's actually a higher level stewardship that most of us are still in the Lake District. These people come along and design a scheme. We have some input into it, but in fairness, not a great deal. We then come to some sort of loose compromise about what we'll do. We sign up to that scheme, and we then agree to comply to those regulations throughout the period of the scheme, which is 10 years. Usually, we get no further input from Natural England for a period of at least 9 years, at which time there starts to be some discussions about whether we might be allowed into another scheme, whether we'll get an extension of our current one, which is a situation at the moment, or whether we will actually look at a new scheme altogether. So despite our best efforts at trying to get advice from Natural England and other associated agencies, it is usually at the very last minute that someone turns up and decides that maybe what we've been doing for the last 9 years hasn't worked very well. Consequently, we'll have to have further sheep reductions, further erosion of our hefting system, a real obstacle to new entrants getting into the farming systems in the Lake District, a reduction in the workforce, and consequently the ultimate disintegration of our farming systems. This doesn't seem to be sensible, didn't seem to be sensible and isn't sensible. So what we thought about was, well, why don't we try and design something that might work a little bit more sensibly? So we've asked for a moratorium on stocking levels for the extension of the 2 schemes that exist on the Kinnyside and Nether Wasdale Commons, which are contiguous, they join each other, with a view to having a landscape-based scheme that goes right across those 2 commons and the one that's in between them, which is Stockdale Moor, which is currently in the process of further stocking reductions in order to get an extension to its higher level stewardship. These schemes are eroding the hefting system in the Lake District, as I suggested. If we have a moratorium on this and we look at a different way of doing things, a better way, a way that will give them the same natural nature recovery outcomes, the same climate change outcomes, and the same overall benefits that everybody will get from, you know, so the public goods type situation. We appreciate it's never been done before, so it's a massive experiment. But what we would like is someone to give us sufficient confidence to actually go forward and do this. Having mooted this idea at various different places, the National Park Authority and the National Trust both came forward and encouraged us to actually get on and do this. So we did. We've formed ourselves into a community interest company, which we will then have a steering group consisting of farmers from the various different areas that are involved. It's effectively the two Western Lake District valleys and the area in between, the two most westerly, the Ennerdale Valley and the Wasdale Valley, and the area in between. In total, it constitutes roughly 5,000 hectares of open common land. And to that, we would like to add a further 3,000 hectares of non-common but freehold unfenced fell, and approximately 3,000 acres of associated in-by land. So in total, we're looking at somewhere in the region of 10, 11,000 hectares of land that is all in an integrated scheme, working right across a multi-farming situation where we've got lots of different farmers working in there. We feel that this is a way to move things forward. It would encourage engagement. It would give farmers ownership of the scheme if they were the ones that were sitting on the steering group. We would obviously be seeking advice from experts, specialists, and particularly on the carbon footprint, but also the carbon storage, carbon sequestration debate as well. We have actually established links with the Soil Carbon Project based in Exeter University with Becky Wilson, who I'm sure some of you are aware of, having worked, I know she's worked quite heavily in the Yorkshire Dales. So that's where we're going. And as it happened, FIPL came along, Farming in Protected Landscapes came along, and rather than us actually making an application for it, we were actually encouraged by the National Park Authority to submit an expression of interest, which we did via the Farmer Network, and Andrea as a Lake District Farming Officer, Lake District National Park Farming Officer. So we have currently an expression of interest lodged with the Lake District National Park to develop what we hope will be a collaborative, connected nature recovery / climate mitigation scheme across an area of approximately 10,000 acres of the western part of the Lake District National Park. The other thing we would like to do is actually make a linkage between the use of common land and the in-by land that it actually requires in order for that common to be actually used. The two things are interdependent. Many of the farms rely on the common to make them sustainable in food production terms. And let's remember that food production is an important part of what we do. And equally, the common depends on people actually having in-by land to accommodate the sheep when they're not on the fell for different reasons. So rather than having separate schemes for commons and then lots of little independent schemes for all the individual farms within the valleys, what we would be looking for was a completely joined up, fully integrated, full genuine partnership scheme across a large area of the Western Lakes. We'll be looking at nature recovery opportunities within the in-by land as well as the common land, but we would like to do it without destroying the very system that it relies upon to continue and to actually exist. If we lose the people out of the valleys from having the opportunity to be sustainable farmers, we actually use the opportunity to deliver any of the nature conservation work as well. And let's be honest, guys, if you haven't got farmers doing it, you can't afford to do it. So actually what we need is support for more farmer bottom-up type nature recovery projects that allow things to develop and things to work in a much less prescribed way. So we're looking for bottom-up flexible schemes. That's what we're hoping to do in the Lake District, Western Lake District. I guess it's a question of watch this space, but we are getting very, very positive responses from, not from the agencies, I've got to say. Natural England don't think it's a particularly good idea, but the National Park and the National Trust do, the farmers do, the general public does, because we've done a bit of a straw poll and asked the general public whether they would like to see an area without any activity in it, without any farming, without any sheep, without any cattle, or would they prefer to see the working type valley systems that are actually in place at the moment. They all, with the exception of one person who I think was Chinese and didn't understand what we were talking about, actually said that they would like to see the working valley systems continue. But obviously COVID might have changed some of that. We haven't had an opportunity to speak to people in a very sensible way at all. But Andrea mentioned earlier there about engaging with the general public. We do a lot of that in all sorts of different ways, and we would like to continue doing that. And that's something that we would focus on heavily if we are successful in acquiring any money through the protected landscapes. If we're not, we'll get some money from somewhere else, because we're very keen to do carbon audits. We're very keen to do wildlife or habitat audits. We want all of this stuff, because despite Natural England having fantastic ambitions, they're not very transparent. We can't see their evidence on which they base their conclusions. And as I say, they're so under-resourced, we only see them once about every 9 years. We don't think that's a very good way of working. We need a different way of working, a better way of working. We think if the farmers are involved from the bottom upwards, we might just achieve that. So very quickly, in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to do. We're hopeful that we can do it. We've certainly got popular support from both farmers and the general public and the other businesses in the area. National Park and National Trust are on side, so things are looking quite hopeful, really. I've probably used more of my time than I had, but it's quite complicated, so that's where I'm at. The other thing I would say is Erdwick shape, protected landscapes. Your protected landscapes have developed under the feet of Erdwick shape. If you get rid of them, they're going to look different. Very good. Cheers, guys.
Thank you very much, Will. Some challenging perspectives and interesting thoughts, and some support and interesting discussion going on in the chat. Perhaps we're moving into the questions. We're halfway through the next question session. I see that Jennifer just raised her hand. I don't know whether Jennifer Dodsworth, you want to actually ask a question, or whether you put it in the chat. It might be nice to have a real live question.
It was an applause emoji, just showing my sort of appreciation for Will's presentation. But yeah, I think it's a fantastic approach, and if it can be facilitated, as a couple of the other people in the chat have said, across some of the other protected landscapes, Northumberland, North Pennines, it would be a great thing to see.
Grand, Jennifer, I owe you a couple of points already, don't I? I'll get you another one.
Right, so let's see if there's any more unanswered questions. Thanks to colleagues as usual for answering the questions as we go. I don't know whether there's any specific questions for Andrea and Will that have come out of this. I see that we've been constantly answering, particularly Sue and Chris and James, as we've gone forward on things that have come out of the last sessions. We have time for another live question if anybody wanted to ask one, just to break things up a little bit or make any comments perhaps before we move on. Or there's next going to be the opportunity within the facilitation groups perhaps to explore some of these ideas we've just heard in more detail.
Adrian, can we pick up a question in the chat about multi-year agreements, please? Someone was asking about the potential for multi-year agreements. Could we pick that one up?
Sorry, Chris, I've missed that one. I've got a Google Drive.
That's
what
I mean. The essence of it was, can we have multi-year agreements? And,
oh, right. Sorry. Yes.
And we are working on where there are longer-term maintenance payments. We're working on trying to capitalise those into an initial payment in the first year, and then people can then use that funding to deliver in years 1 and 2. If people want to do a big scheme, I think it was Liz, said that you might not be able to deliver it all in year 1. We can't carry forward money over between the years, and neither can you. But what we could do, if we can't, we can try and capitalise everything, stuff into a year 1 payment, so you can deliver the maintenance parts in year 2. If there are capital elements, we can probably fund one lot in year 1 with an acknowledgement that you'll be making an application to which we will also support, but we'll have to take it out of year 2's funding. So we might not be able to give you all the money up front. And if something needs planning permission, I don't think we'll be keen to fund something subject to planning permission. I think we'd rather have the planning permission in place first. So if it's a big scheme where you want to do some preparatory works in year 1 and you're planning permission in year 2, that does give us a bit of a challenge. But we can't carry forward money in theory, but we are trying to capitalise some elements to lump the payments into year one so that you can deliver in year two around maintenance stuff. That's harder around capital works. But if you've got a multi-year idea, we'll do all we can to help you deliver it in the way that you want to deliver it.
Thank you, Chris.
You might want to come back on that. I tied myself up a bit there. We're trying to be too complicated, but we'll help.
Yeah, Chris, just Adrian, perhaps just to add to that, I think what we're also seeing is in terms of those farmers who perhaps haven't engaged recently in current types of agri-environment schemes, or those who have perhaps had a bad experience somewhere along the line, perhaps through penalties, who've got a bit nervous of it. We're seeing that scope for this phase. So there might be a phase one application where they do a little bit, and that could lead to a sort of bigger bit in the second or third year. And I think that's another really good tool to, you know, help people get comfortable with this approach. Thanks.
Yeah, we just want to accommodate people, and if that's the way that people feel comfortable, that's the way we should be helping them go forward.
Right, thank you, Chris and Sue. Will, did you want to come back in?
Just on that discussion around, you know, how funding is delivered and how it'll be actually utilised over the period that it's available. And Sue's point about some farmers finding it being a little bit nervous about engaging with all of this sort of stuff. We need a different type of scheme, guys. You know, you cannot carry on having something that is based roughly around what was introduced as part of the ESA some 30 odd years ago. It is no longer fit for purpose. You need to have a brand new look at this, and possibly ELMS will allow that to happen. But the more information we get coming out of it, the more it would seem that it is simply an extension of much of what we already have. And that actually is not necessarily the best use of that funding. We need to look at different ways of doing it, guys. I appreciate everyone has different agendas, but if we're going to have sustainable working communities in many of these rural areas, we need to look very, very carefully at how this funding is actually targeted and how this funding is actually used, having been targeted. It needs to make a difference. It needs to be worthwhile, and then farmers will engage with it. Currently, funding often comes with so many complications and so many downsides, if you would, that farmers are reluctant to get involved in it. They're simply happier to carry on unsupported in many cases until such time as they can't do it anymore, and then they cease to exist. It is not the way forward. We need something that is actually workable, delivers for everyone, is genuinely partnership based, and is genuinely designed and driven by the people within those communities, and not by someone designing, with the greatest of respect, not by someone designing a scheme on a desktop somewhere that's possibly never set foot in those communities. It is not the way to do it.
Can I just come back on that, Adrian?
Of course, yeah. And then we're going to move on after this. We'll just take you on to Neil.
Yeah, I won't be long. It's just to say to Will that from my perspective and what I've seen of FIPL, and that leading into ELMS as we go along is exactly what Will is talking about. I think it's been designed with that in mind. It's about localism, it's about flexibility, it's about putting the idea out there to farmers and saying, give us your thoughts. What can work for farmers in this particular area, this particular landscape, protected landscape. So I completely agree with Will, but I think FIPL is the whole almost is designed with all of that in mind. So I hope that you are successful in your bid, Will, because I think it could fit with what you're doing absolutely bang on. I would agree with you, Neil, but FIPL is 3 years and a fairly limited budget, let's be honest. If we're looking for something sustainable going forward, we need to be a bit more creative, I think. Yeah, no, that's a fair point, but I do think that it's about leading into ELMS, and I think it's going to be looked at extremely closely by Defra, going back to the evaluation we were talking about, and if it is successful and we as national parks can deliver it really well, and you as farmers can deliver it really well, then we've got a brilliant scheme going forward. Thanks, Adrian.
Yeah, great. Thanks, then, Neil. Really positive spin on that and good discussion in that one. We really must get into the facilitated sessions. I don't know whether Ellen, you want to introduce how this is going to work and how we're going to go into the sessions.
Yep, thank you very much. So everyone's been allocated, there are 10 breakout sessions. Everyone should have a facilitator in there who has been briefed, but essentially the brief is to introduce yourselves and share your interest in FIPL, and perhaps some of the projects and themes that you're interested in exploring. And also if there are any information gaps, I think a lot of questions have been raised in the chat, but if there's any information gaps where we can try and find answers or publish signpost information afterwards, then let us know as well. Yeah, so I can open the breakout rooms and then you'll be brought back to the main room just about 10 to 1, and then there'll just be a chance for a very brief feedback and a wrap-up session. So great, I'll open the breakout rooms.
Right, welcome back, everybody. Hope everybody's back in the main room and that you've had an interesting, if all too brief, discussion on the next stages. I don't know, we've got, obviously, how many facilitators did we have, Ellen?
We had 10 groups.
We had 10 groups, so we're not, I think the key thing is that we're not going to be able to feed back everything that people said, but I think it would be good to give people the opportunity for each of the facilitators perhaps to just give one really key element of their discussions, and I'll start on that because I was one of the facilitators as well. The key points we discussed really is trying to get the clarity as to how it meshes with existing schemes, how it's delivered, who makes the decisions. Still a lot of technical questions really in my group, along with project ideas. So, you know, lots of good discussions on that front. I don't know whether, Ellen, you want to perhaps introduce the facilitators if you've got the list rather than I'll just go through them very, very quickly because we are running out of short of time.
Yep, perfect. Adam?
Thank you, Ellen. Yeah, we had a discussion. I think most of our discussion just focused on the complexity of the whole funding situation now. Just, you know, there are a plethora of old and new schemes. It's just difficult to actually weave your way through to see where this actually fits in. And also the other thing is just the importance of communicating out what this scheme does, how flexible it is. That's the way you're going to actually generate uptake. But complexity in language were the key things about, you know, we use it all the time. Some farmers aren't familiar with it. That was kind of the crux of mine.
Right, thanks, Adam.
Great, thank you. And Melanie?
Yeah, just a couple of quick points from ours. Bottom-up approach was absolutely key. A few people said that, but also another point is they want people, farmers want people that can be out there on the farm, walking around and advising. And if I could just ask Kate, because Kate Caulfield was in my group, if I could just ask Kate to say what you said about that with the new posts.
I just said very quickly, I talked about the farm engagement leads, who are posts that some of this programme of funding will go towards funding posts in protected landscapes to have a farm engagement lead. So that farm engagement lead, there should be a representative in every protected landscape to fulfil that role, who can provide advice to applicants, help build their project with them, and be out there on the ground working with you to build your application. So it's just flagging that that role exists and to contact your protected landscape to be pointed in the right direction of who to talk to.
And with that, the number of people will depend on the budget for that area, each area. So, yeah, thanks, Ellen.
Great, thanks, Melanie. Ellen.
Great, thank you. Andrea?
Hello, we seem to have a very Yorkshire Dales focus group, so we were just talking really about the range of funding that's available and other funding ideas such as the White Rose Community Forest and just talking about the range of opportunities available for farmers in the area.
Okay, great. And James?
Yes, all sorts of stuff discussed in our group. I think the one that I'll mention that hasn't been mentioned yet is looking at things that could be done in FIPL that don't necessarily fit into the current schemes, and how that can all kind of work towards ELM, basically.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And Ruth?
Frustration here too at the complexity and the number of people that come on farm to advise, and that need for that one trusted person to help you navigate all of that. And a key point made from the other side was that it is possible to fund things that are fundable by countryside stewardship using FIPL. It just can't be double funded. So that might be a misunderstanding amongst people, but just because it can be funded by CS, it doesn't mean that you can't still use FIPL.
Great.
Good point, Ruth.
And Neil?
Thanks, Ellen. And yeah, a massive consensus amongst our group, and that was very much about collaboration and collective approaches as we go forward. A little bit of the akin that Will was talking about, and groups of farmers coming together to make schemes happen. That doesn't come without its challenges. You get a cluster of neighbouring farmers, but within that you need one particular person to drive that, and you also need really good advice from the protected landscapes to sort of make that happen and facilitate all that. So very much a thought process of collaborative approaches, especially as we're going forward, but yeah, not without challenges.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Hannah?
Yeah, so there was a bit of talk around carbon and the need for like more clarity around what baselines that should be used and what tools. There was an element of we need to just kind of follow the progress of what's going on, but there is some good advice out there. So yeah, a bit of talk around carbon, but something that hasn't come up yet was around inheritance tax exemption management plans, so ITEMPs, and there is some guidance on that under the CS guidance. There's like a leaflet that you can find, and it's all around kind of making sure that you're not clashing with anything in those historic kind of ITEMPs. So yeah, just to be aware of that for like tenant farmers and like landowners that have those.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Charlotte?
Our discussion touched on a number of the themes that have already come out, particularly around the question of cooperation and how to make that work and the challenges of working cooperatively, and kind of how the scheme could maybe help support that, facilitating bringing groups together, which maybe isn't an option in other schemes, but also the necessity to have more information about how the different schemes are going to integrate with one another and provide a more long-term vision that people can work towards collectively. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you. And Sarah?
Thanks, Ellen. Similar themes, really. Letting farmers drive ideas, working collaboratively, thinking positively and taking this opportunity. I think that came through as a really positive stance from Will. We had Will in our group, and that there's always, you know, a way. Let's use this to start, even if it doesn't get us to the destination. If it gets us along the road, then great.
Great, thank you. And I think that's all 10 of you. So thank you very much.
Thanks to all the facilitators for not only the feeding back, but obviously facilitating the sessions. It's been a whistle-stop 2 hours looking at farming in protected landscapes. Hope you've all got lots out of it. thank you very much, everybody, for being involved and for putting lots in the chat. And thanks to our helpers for trying to answer all the questions in the chat as we've gone along. But anything that's left outstanding, we will continue to answer those as we move forward. I'd like to give particular thanks to all our speakers in terms of the event. I think they've been thoroughly fantastic at keeping to time, but also keeping us very informed, lots of challenges and great discussion around that. And finally, to give particular thanks to the Northern Real Farming Conference, and particularly Ellen for bringing all this programme together, again, at very short notice. So hope everybody has enjoyed themselves. I think that people have and will continue to be in touch, and let's hope that the real fantastic opportunity for farmers and land managers in the protected landscapes, as well as protected landscape organisation themselves, is brought to fruition over the next 3 years. So I think at that, unless there's any final notices, Ellen, we can end virtually spot on time.
Perfect. Just thank you to you as well, Adrian. Brilliantly chaired. Thank you so much.